Genetics ruined your life. So many scientists, many researchers are now saying that genetics is the cause of many chronic health concerns, chronic health diseases. So for example, type 1 diabetes. These are people whose pancreas cannot secrete insulin. They can't secrete insulin, so if they don't get insulin, they will die because their blood sugar rises too high. So let's think about that. If they cannot produce insulin, and it's due to genetics, like scientists and medical doctors believe it to be, right? Let's think about that. 3,000 years ago, they didn't have insulin for people to inject into their bodies. So what happened to those people? They probably died, probably early on, right? And so if they died early on, how would they be able to have sex and make babies? Because it's through those people making babies that those genetic mutations will continue. Right? So if we think about survival of the fittest, back then they didn't have any medications, no antibiotics. If you had a genetic problem, most likely you would die early. How would you have an opportunity to have sex and make babies and pass on those genetic mutations, right? So then some of y'all may be thinking, oh, from those of y'all who believe genetics is the cause of everything, well, okay, maybe before they died, they had sex and they had babies and that passed on the genetic mutation, right? Because remember, genetics means you got it from your parents and your grandparents and so forth, right? If that was the case, wouldn't you think that even if you had the opportunity to make babies, your life expectancy, which means how long you would live, would be really short? Then we should have, if that's the case, right? Let's say people with these genetic mutations were able to have babies and they somehow survived. But it should become less and less and less, right? Because if it was truly a genetic caused by, if your chronic disorder is truly caused by genetics, we should see in today, 3,000 years later, we should see less and less of those genetic mutations. How come we are seeing more and more genetic mutations? Right? I was watching a podcast and that inspired this question because the scientists mentioned this point, and it just makes logical sense. If chronic diseases were caused by genetic mutations, by now, 1,000 years ago, 1,000 years later, 100 years later, even 10 years later, shouldn't we be seeing less of these genetic mutations? But in fact, we are seeing more. So is genetics really the cause of your health concern, your health disease? Or is it man-made? Is it the food we eat, the medications we're taking? I'm not here to answer that question. I'm just here to raise a question to see if we think logically about this and they're saying genetics, then what is really causing the genetics disorder? I'm not saying people are not finding genetic mutations, but are those genetic mutations really inherited or are they man-made? Or are they created? By the way, the food industry, the agriculture industry, pharmaceutical, the medical industry, what's going on? You decide for yourself. Make sure you hit the follow button if you like more of these interesting, provoking questions.